evaluating teachers and looking at teacher performance, but also the realization that if we're going to keep more of our great teachers doing the work that they do, we've got to find a way to give them new opportunities in the classroom and new ways to think about teacher roles. Technology gives us some opportunities, but also new ways to organize our teams and our structures to keep people motivated and to expand the impact of our most talented teachers. And who are more talented than our National Teachers of the Year? So we're very excited to have them here. So now I'm going to turn it over to hear a little more about our conversation to Catherine. Oh, but Michelle is reminding me that we would love to have people tweeting, both here and online. The hashtag, remind me again, transform the profession. Hashtag transform the profession. Now, if that's a long hashtag, that means many tweets, people. You got to really get it in short bursts today. All right, so please welcome Catherine, the head of the National Network of the State Teachers of the Year. Thank you. But also
Good
the realization
morning.
that if we're going to teach,
This is a great morning for NNSTOY.
doing
This
the
is
work
a very
that they do, we've got to
exciting
find a
morning
way
for NNSTOY.
to give them new,
We
but
are
also the
celebrating
realization that if we're going to teach and if we're going to keep more of our great
new
teachers
existence.
doing the work
So
that
we're
they do, we've
pretty
got to find a
new,
way to give them
member
new
of the
teams, new
DC
opportunities
policy
to keep people motivated,
and
and
this is
new
our
ways to
very
think about
first white
teacher
paper.
roles. Of our most talented.
We are
Technology
very,
gives us some
very
opportunities. And who
excited
are more
to
talented than our National
and we are
Teachers of the
so
Year? So we're
appreciative
very
of
people
all
motivated
of
to have
you
them here.
to
So now I'm
share
going to turn it
with
over
us.
of our most to hear a
We're
little more
also
about our
extremely
conversation.
grateful
Who are more
tonight
talented
to
than our
Catherine.
National Teachers? But Michelle is reminding me that we would love to have people tweeting. Now I'm going to turn it over to hear a little more about the hashtag. Remind me again, Catherine. Oh, but Michelle is reminding me that we would love to hashtag transform the profession here. Now that's a long hashtag. That means many tweets. People, you got to really transform the profession. Short hashtag transform the profession. Please welcome. Now that's a long hashtag. That means many tweets. National Network. You got to really get it in short bursts today. All right, so please welcome Catherine, the head of the National Network of the State Teachers of the Year.
Said, but there's nothing new here. And I said, that's morning. There's nothing new here. We have been talking about these same things in education for a long time. When we look at the 5 structures that NNSTOY has identified as missing from teaching, these structures are not new. They exist in industry, and they've existed in industry for a long time. So why don't we have them in teaching? This paper is important because it was born from a group of teachers who were deeply concerned about the profession, who were tired of talking and wanted action, and who came together around formulating ideas about, sorry, I was just told I need the mic a little bit louder, who came together around formulating ideas about how we might be able to make transformation happen, so that teaching could be an honored profession and teachers could be treated as professionals. The chair of our board of directors sends her regards. She can't be here in person to offer them to you because she wasn't permitted to take a professional day to be here. That's not professional. We deserve better. We are teachers and we are people of action. We've been trained to be solution-oriented people who find answers to problems. And so this paper represents some of our best thinking. We can't do this work alone. We need other great thinkers to help us and do this work with us. And there are many other teacher organizations that are looking to do the same kinds of things. We need the best minds in education policy to help us. And we have some of those best minds on our panel today. And we have some of those best minds here in this room today. And we ask you, read the paper and join with us and help us to institutionalize these ideas and make them a reality. Not in 6 months, not in 6 weeks. Let's figure out together what we can do right now, today, to start making change a reality so that we are attracting our brightest minds into teaching, and those brightest minds are choosing to stay there. We appreciate your being here, and we look forward to working with each and every one of you. I would now like to introduce our panel. We have quite a stellar group, and I'm going to move out of the way. I promise I won't trip today. Grace is not my middle name. I'm going to start on this end. Megan Allen is the Florida State Teacher of the Year 2010. Megan spent last year working in a hybrid role, part of the day in her classroom and part of the day out of her classroom working with teachers and working with policy people to bring policy into the classroom. Megan this year is teaching at the higher education level. She's teaching teachers. So Megan is not in the P12 classroom this year. The New Teacher Project wrote a paper called The Irreplaceables about the drain that we're experiencing as we are losing some of our very best teachers to the classroom. Megan Allen is irreplaceable. How do we replace a Megan Allen? That's one of the reasons why we're here today. Next to Megan is Chris Minnick, who needs no introduction to this audience. Chris is the CEO of the Council of Chief State School Officers. The council has been a tremendous friend and partner to NNSTOY as we got our feet on the ground and got up and running. We could not ask for a more supportive friend and partner than CCSSO. And Chris personally has been a great help to me as I got my feet on the ground. This is a whole new gig for me. Next to Chris is Christopher Poulos. Christopher Poulos is the Connecticut State Teacher of the Year 2007. Chris is in a hybrid role this year, half-time in his school teaching and half-time in the Connecticut Department of Education, where he is working to help the commissioner pursue avenues for teacher leadership. Chris is going to talk about distributed leadership today. Megan is going to talk about continuums of professional practice. Next to Chris, we have Mike, whom you've already met, but enough can't be said about his generosity. Joshua Parker is next to Mike. Josh is the Maryland State Teacher of the Year 2012. Josh is also in a hybrid role. Are you seeing a trend here? Josh chairs the English Language Arts and World Languages Department in his middle school. He is also working as a coach and mentor to struggling teachers, and he is also teaching. Next to Josh, we have a very dear friend of NNSTOY, Joanne Weiss. Joanne has, throughout her career, made involving teacher voices and teacher leadership a hallmark. And we cannot say enough about the appreciation that we feel for Joanne at NNSTOY. So this is our wonderful panel. This is the way that we're going to work. We're going to ask each of our panelists to spend 10 minutes, and I'm going to be the timekeeper, a role that I hate, but I'm going to do it well. Talking Megan, Christopher, and Josh, talking about one of the 5 structures that we identify in our paper. Josh is going to talk about collaborative models of practice, so we will not be hearing today about guiding principles or actionable feedback, but you can read about those in the paper. After each of them has presented on their topic, we're going to ask our discussants, Chris Minnick and Joanne and Mike, to share their thoughts about something that they've heard or something that they've read in the paper, and they will each have 10 minutes. Then Mike is going to wrap things up, and then we're going to feed you. We are bringing in a wonderful lunch, so please stay and enjoy it. I'm going to start with Christopher Poulos. So Chris, you are in this hybrid role. And in this role, you are having some very unique and new experiences. But throughout your teaching career, you've been in a lot of schools. Not teaching in a lot of schools, but visiting a lot of schools. And you've had the opportunity to work with a lot of other teachers. Why did you choose this topic, distributed leadership? And what do you think is so important about it in terms of transforming teaching and also transforming student learning and the way that schools work?
Okay, well, thank you, Catherine. And it is an honor to be here to share my teacher leader perspective with you on distributive leadership. The focus of my comments are going to be about how distributive leadership can create opportunities for teachers that ultimately lead to high levels of student achievement. And how I hope to show you this is through examples from the field. As Catherine mentioned, I am a practitioner. I still work with teachers and students at my school. I'm going to try to blend in some research that backs up some of those examples I've seen, and then I'll, at the end, conclude with an analysis of the overall benefits of distributive leadership in public education. distributive leadership doesn't happen automatically. You need a few things in place for it to happen. For example, you need top talent, you need leaders, teacher leaders in schools. You need some mechanism to train them to serve in their positions. And you also need an infrastructure that supports those type of roles in schools. And so I see this happening formally, and I'm going to share some informal examples of where I see distributive leadership in action, and informally or on the verge of implementation. The first experience I'd like to share has to do with teacher evaluation. In Connecticut, over the last year, it's kind of been a really hot topic, teacher evaluation reform. And last year, districts spent a lot of time developing plans to meet the state guidelines for teacher evaluation. And I had the privilege to serve on my district's committee to develop our plan. And one of the neat things we were able to blend into our plan is the concept of a peer practice coach. Now, you might have heard of this concept called complementary observer or complementary evaluator, but it's a role for teachers who have earned an exemplary rating in their practice from the evaluation process to serve as a guide or teacher leader in evaluation, in the area of evaluation. And so they might work in a capacity as simple as helping a teacher draft a student learning objective, all the way up to observing a teacher and providing feedback on their performance. This is a great opportunity for teachers. It creates an opportunity for people to keep in the classroom, but also to provide leadership and mentorship to their colleagues in the schools. It validates the evaluation reform, and we have, with evaluation reform, we have increased demands for administrators. They have to observe teachers more frequently, and so it addresses that increased demand by distributing it out to the teachers. And the best part about it is the feedback that teachers are getting is from their peers. And so people that might be more intimate with their content or the pedagogy associated with their teaching position. Hand in hand with evaluation, another example I'd like to share of distributive leadership is with professional learning. Now, research says for professional learning to lead to student achievement, teachers have to be engaged in approximately 49 hours or more over 10 months to 12 months of the learning cycle. And so under the old system of professional development, schools struggled with getting those ongoing 49 hours in. And with, one of the ways that they try to address it is through professional learning committees. Now, we've heard the good, the bad, and the ugly about professional learning committees. In a way, distributive leadership is working into these PLCs to make them more effective and lead to student achievement is by training professional learning facilitators to lead these. People that know how to navigate conversations between beginning teachers and veteran teachers, people that know how to look at data and make decisions about data, and guide a collaborative discussion with their peers on a topic that supports their goals and contributes to their learning. This is, again, another opportunity for teachers who are excited about learning to have a leadership role and remain in the classroom. It promotes collaboration, which I think we would all agree leads to better teaching. And it's a mechanism for allowing these 49 hours of embedded, meaningful professional learning to occur. And the third example I'd like to share with you is distributive leadership as it relates to Common Core implementation. Okay? So I think a bad thing, a scary thing for me as a teacher is the State Department decides we're going to implement Common Core. They get the word out to the assistant superintendents of curriculum and instruction. The assistant superintendents meet with their principals and say, hey, you got to get your teachers to do this. And at a faculty meeting, they talk about implementing Common Core. For me, that's a little scary. I'd like to share a story about a teacher that I work with in my school named Lori. She's a math teacher, an exceptional math teacher who cares about education. We're implementing Common Core next year. She got herself involved in some regional workshops about how to implement, and the principal at my school noticed this. And so he gave her time to work with the other math teachers in our school to share what she was learning about the implementation of Common Core and how it aligned to our existing curriculum and how that they could make that shift and do it well. And in our school, because of Lori, and I wish we could say we had one of these people for every discipline, math is ahead of the game on the upcoming implementation. And so, why this type of distributive leadership for Common Core implementation is great is because rather than the top-down model that I described as something that scared me, we have more of teachers directly involved with the implementation. It's a bottom-up grassroots approach. It builds buy-in, and the teachers are seeing the value to this new initiative because of Lori's work. And so those are the three big ones: evaluation, professional learning, and Common Core. And what are the overall benefits of what I just described? I think that whenever you give opportunities to teachers, you're going to increase retention. You're going to attract top talent into the profession, and you're going to retain them because they're going to say, hey, I could be a teacher, and I could also make an impact in my profession and at my school. Retention research says that teachers are looking for these leadership opportunities. Another benefit is that it can increase teacher involvement through distributive leadership. And when involvement increases, understanding increases. There's a Chinese proverb that I like that says, tell me and I'll forget, show me and I'll remember, and involve me and I'll understand. The more teachers understand about things like evaluation and Common Core, the more they're involved, the more they're going to understand. And when they're working with teachers, that understanding is going to be contagious across school faculties. And so I'd like to just conclude with kind of my vision. And as a teacher leader, I always have to say something about what I think should happen moving on in the future. My vision for distributive leadership. And I see these roles that I've described, but I also see other roles, maybe teacher leaders involved as policy partners. So a teacher that can remain in the classroom and work with his or her local board of education on the development and implementation of policy. I think that it's great when you have a teacher voice at the table. You can inform policymakers of the implications of their decisions on classroom practice. And at the same time, those teachers can learn about the rationale for good policy and bring that back to the teachers in the teacher's room and explain this is why we're doing this. Again, building buy-in. And finally, one last visionary item is to involve teachers in strategic planning and school improvement while they're teaching. And at the same time, if they can inform this process, they could provide a voice from the classroom. We're going to see better results in school communities. The more we involve teachers, the more we're going to be able to retain and keep them in the classroom, which is going to ultimately lead to increases in student achievement. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Megan, in your role last year, in your hybrid role, you experienced a lot of joys and some challenges. Can you share both some of those joys and challenges with us and tell us why you believe that establishing career continuums will make a difference for teachers, students, and schools?
Absolutely. Good morning. It's so nice to see so many friendly faces, new faces, old faces, and for us to all be here doing a little brain bashing on how we want to transform our profession. So, Catherine, I want to first kind of set the stage for why we need these roles, and better yet, why our students need these roles, and then kind of move into what it actually looks like on the ground level. What was my day like as a teacherpreneur last year? So I want to start with a statement. And Chris, this is a great segue from your part, but we have a teacher dropout problem. And how do we know this? Here are a few facts from the National Commission on Teaching in America's Future. 20%, that is the teacher turnover rate at our urban or highest need schools. 50%, that is how much the teacher attrition rate has grown over the past 15 years. Scary, right? 56%, that is how many new teachers we lose in the first 5 years. And this is especially scary when we think of our Gen Y teachers, who, according to the Learning Point Associates, have a dismally low retention rate. So let's talk money. How much does this cost? An estimated $7.3 billion a year. And I think looking at a monetary figure in black and white is one thing, but more importantly, I think of the cost to our students, the students sitting in our classrooms right now. At schools like mine last year at Shaw Elementary School in Tampa, Florida, where almost every student is living in poverty, we don't stand a chance at closing the achievement gap if we can't keep our teachers. And a lot of this retention is happening in schools like mine. And just like a teacher to bring a visual aid, but I sure did. These are the faces, these are some of my babies from last year. Like, these are the faces that are affected a lot by this issue. So why is this happening? When we look at the data for why teachers choose to leave the profession, the lack of advancement opportunities is a primary reason. So let's think for a moment about what this means. And I'm going to pose a question to let us simmer on, and we're going to do a classroom trick called a turn and talk, or a think, pair, share. So I'm going to pose the question, and you're going to turn and talk to your neighbor, to your left or to your right, your shoulder partner, about your thinking with that question. So the question is, what opportunities for career advancement are available for teachers in our public schools? Turn and talk to your neighbors. All right, if you could hear me, give me 1 snap. If you can hear me, give me 2 snaps. If you can hear me, give me 3 snaps. If you can hear me, give me 3 snaps in Z formation. Another teacher move. Pat yourselves on your backs for your teacher, for your turn and talk. That was really good. But the things that generally come to mind are assistant principal and principal. And these are positions where you have to leave the classroom. The choices are limited. We need opportunities for advancement in education besides administration. There was some very fascinating data that came out last year in the 2013 MetLife study on this very thing. When they were asking teachers if they were interested in being in administration, a principal, assistant principal, 84% of teachers said they were not very interested or not interested at all. So 84% of teachers not interested in that pathway. But 23% of teachers were extremely or very interested in serving in a hybrid role where they could have that opportunity for advancement but did not have to leave their students. They could lead without leaving. So sitting in front of you today is a prime example of a teacher who has left the public education classroom. It's a sensitive issue for me. I love my job this year, but it was really difficult to leave my students. I'm one of those teachers who loves being in the classroom. I crave time with my students, but I want to lead outside those walls as well and encourage others to do the same thing. I'm a teacher who is adding to that dropout rate. I've left these guys behind. But I want to talk about what NNSTOY and a lot of other organizations are thinking about, a solution so this doesn't have to be the case. So last year I worked in a hybrid role as a teacherpreneur. It's kind of a fun and new word, but a teacherpreneur. So this was in a joint partnership with my school district, Hillsborough County down in Florida, and the Center for Teaching Quality. How do I know this role was successful? My students made great growth in the classroom. They learned so much, they grew so much. Teacher leadership is still growing exponentially across the state. And now in Hillsborough County, there are 17 more teachers in this kind of a hybrid role. So we started with 2 last year, and we're at 17 now. We're keeping our great teachers in the classroom by beginning to offer them the career lattice that they crave and that our students need. So this is what my typical day looked like as a teacherpreneur. At 7:30 a.m., I facilitated learning with Javiana Drushan and a group of students before school in a reading group. At 8:10, I taught 36 fifth graders how to fall in love with reading. At 10:30, I worked with my professional learning community and collaborated with my colleagues, working as a team so we could all improve our instruction for our students. At 11:15, I made phone calls home, mostly happy, to my families, and packed up for round 2 of my day. At 11:45, I had a meeting with the local Ed Foundation on a speaker series we were developing to get more conversation in the community around education. At 1 o'clock, I met with the district leadership committee to plan for more hybrid roles in order to take our evaluation system to the next level. At 2:15, I worked on connecting teachers in a virtual community so we could collaborate and problem solve on issues around the Common Core. At 3 o'clock, I had a Skype session with colleagues in Colorado and North Carolina developing a teacher-led, teacher-created webinar series around the Common Core. At 3:45, I hustled my booty back to school for a faculty meeting. And then I worked with my colleagues and my team to plan for the next day's instruction. At 7 o'clock, then I attended a webinar hosted by another colleague on school redesign and how we can have more teacher-led schools. I had the chance last year to lead without leaving. I had the opportunity to impact my students' growth, but also impact my colleagues and the profession. I was able to practice my craft in the classroom with the people that I love most while advocating for those students outside the classroom walls. One of the best things is that these roles are the keystone to the successful transformation of education. They are so vital. It must be led by those who know our students best, those who live and breathe education, who are dedicated to the lives of our children, our educators. And with a hybrid role and the time and space to actually lead our profession in policy, practice, curriculum, partnerships, we can successfully transform education as we know it. Our students and my students are depending on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Josh, you wear many, many hats in your school, many hats. Almost all of them involve working very closely. I'm going to walk the mic down to you. Okay. Almost all of them involve working very closely with colleagues. Can you talk a little bit about how you've built those collaborative relationships and suggestions that you might have for how we can replicate what you're doing in other schools where time and space are so constraining in terms of teacher collaboration?
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. Wouldn't you like to be in Megan's classroom? How awesome was that, right? And Chris is so smart, and I just had a chance to meet him, and I love his comments. I'm just like being on this panel. In Paulos Bambrick Santoya's book, Leverage Leadership, he talks about what successful schools do and what are some of the practices that you see every day. He puts them into 7 distinct levers, and these levers are those things that promote high achievement on the behalf of students. His 2 super levers are data-driven instruction and school culture. The 2 things he said impacts student achievement the most in successful schools. And the structure that I'm going to talk about, collaboration, supports both of those. Because what is data-driven instruction if you're not doing it together? And what is a vibrant school culture if it's not practiced throughout teamwork to create common kind of solutions to creative problems? So I want to talk about, of course, in the kind of the same vein as the other 2 participants here, what does it look like? How can we implement it? And what are the long-term benefits and unintended consequences of collaboration? So I'm going to first start with what it looks like. And I think before we talk about what it actually looks like on a day-in, day-out basis, as Megan so perfectly did just now, I was tired after just hearing that, right? I think we want to talk about this belief that I have, that beliefs are the drumbeat of practice. That is to say, before I can see it, I have to believe it. So before we talk about collaboration, there are 3 things you have to believe about collaboration. First, that it's necessary. Second, that it's monitored. And third, that it's modeled. In order to have collaboration in our schools in the way that we need to have it, all of the leadership and the teachers have to believe that it is a necessary function of actual successful schooling. Secondly, they have to believe that they have to be the ones modeling it along with other teacher leaders. What is missing from education is teaching. And that's kind of scary in a leadership situation because leaders just tell and they don't teach as often as they need to. But collaboration and the things that matter the most need to be modeled and taught before they are expected. Standards need to be modeled and taught before they're implemented. Things that we think are the most important need to be modeled and taught. Because at the end of the day, what's going to save teaching is teaching. So the second belief that is before practice is the modeling. And thirdly, it's the monitoring. What you measure gets done. And you have to inspect what you expect. So I think that it's important to monitor the collaboration. So once those beliefs are in kind of practice, here's what you'll see. A couple years ago, I was a department chair at Windsor Mill Middle School, and I was department chair of English, Reading, and World Languages. And I had taken over the department chair role fairly early in my career, and I was really excited about it. And I said, we're going to do a great job, and the MSAs are coming up, and we're just going to do great. So I'm doing all of these things, and I'm in my own silo at that time, just kind of teaching, and I'm telling what everybody what to do. I'm not teaching, but I'm telling. And I'm, of course, teaching in my classroom, doing a great job there. And I got the Baltimore County Teacher of the Year award, then the Maryland Teacher of the Year award. So then the results came back in May. And we had taken a dive in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade by 5 points overall. And I was crushed, absolutely heartbroken. I thought I was doing a good job. But I decided, and I talked, of course, with my members of my department, and they said, well, you know, Josh, you were telling us a lot, but you weren't showing us. You weren't helping us to understand. So we created together a new blueprint for what great English instruction looks like in every classroom. We took a whole summer and we sat down as a team and created what our standards were going to be for excellence. The next year, then we monitored that. We met together weekly with common planning time, and we talked about what our lessons looked like matched to our rubric for excellence, and we did that every week. So we kept on having conversations. That's one of the things I like about working together. You have these rich conversations that then inform your practice, and students end up winning. So at the end of the year, of course, everybody's waiting for the scores to come back. Now, I had already looked at some internal polling, which is a popular DC term. So I looked at some internal numbers, and I said, you know what? I feel really good about this. And I was telling everybody, and that's the other thing about collaboration. When you're doing a good job in a collaborative environment, you have to socialize that understanding. So I told everybody in my school, we're doing a great job in the English department. Now, the math department didn't like that too much, but maybe they should have been more collaborative. But so we were talking and socializing a concept, and I'm going to tell you, if us socializing a concept started to kind of empower our teachers to try more and take more risks. They became more confident in their practice, and so did the students. So the results coming back in, I remember just like it was yesterday, I was at another conference and someone emailed me, said the scores are in, so I'm just like nervous, breathing. I look at the scores, and we had made all of our gains back and then some. And for the first time in school history, we made all of our targets in reading, special ed, African American, every single subgroup. And that's because we collaborated. I can't do anything alone that's worthwhile. So that's kind of what it looks like. Now, of course, collaboration doesn't have to be meeting all the time face-to-face. It can be through wikis, through blogs, through video chats. But it has to happen at the school level before we take it anywhere else. I think a lot of times we're so focused on having international exposure and interstate conversation, we forget that the most important collaboration is at home. So that's what it looks like. Now, I talked about what it looks like, and also how do we implement this? Well, I had 3 beliefs. Now I'm going to have 3 commitments. If you're going to implement it, then you need to commit to data, commit to scheduling, and commit to teaching. Data analysis has to be something that really ferments this process to something great. Secondly, you have to commit to putting common planning time in the schedule. That is a non-negotiable option, because remember, your belief is that it's necessary. So if it's necessary, it's scheduled. And then finally, you're committing to teaching it. That means that I model it not just once, but all the time. I'm consistently modeling what it looks like to look at data, to collaborate on the lesson study, to implement it, and to reassess. I'm constantly, as an administrator, modeling that. And I think that's the key. And Megan talked about this a little bit, leading without leaving. And I think that one of the things that also needs to change about our structure is this idea that administrators aren't teachers still. Okay, you can still stay there and leave and lead in the same building. Administrators actually should be your best teachers. And that's kind of my belief with that. So we have that on terms of how you implement it. And then finally, what are the long-term and unintended consequences? Thank you. So as we collaborate together intimately, consistently, effectively, we actually start to build this idea that your idea matters and so does mine. We start to build what actually culture responsive instruction looks like in practice. Because as I collaborate with you, I understand that I don't have all the answers. Neither do you, but together we can make more. I start to value your culture, your understanding, and your diversity of thought. I think Washington could use a lot more collaboration, right? So that's one of the unintended consequences of it and the long-term benefits of it. And I'll conclude with 2 Latin phrases that I believe. The first one is uno or homo uni libri, which is one book, man of one book. And Thomas Aquinas, about 3 centuries ago, said, fear the man of one book. I think we should fear the school of one thought. If we don't have diverse thoughts and diverse perspectives that we're allowing entree into the conversations, then that's a fearful thing indeed. And finally, my alma mater, which is Notre Dame of Maryland University, their motto is veritatem prosequimur, which is pursue truth. The only way we can pursue truth is if we pursue it together, genuinely, authentically. And the truth that we'll arrive at, which will help our students, will be more powerful, more comprehensive, and more impactful. So I think that's the future of collaboration, but we have to be serious about it. And we have to put it into practice as soon as possible. Thank you.
Aren't they terrific? These are America's teachers. These are the people that we need to find ways to keep in our classrooms while still giving them opportunities to lead outside of the classroom. Thank you all so much. I'd like to, before we switch gears and go to our discussants, recognize two people who are here. I'd like to recognize Michael Flynn, who is the Massachusetts 2008 State Teacher of the Year. Michael, could you please stand up? And I would like to ask you to join me in welcoming and thanking Tabitha Grossman. Tabitha was the primary author on this report who corralled us State Teachers of the Year together and picked our brains and helped us to codify our thinking and helped us to figure out how were we going to lay this report out. We recognized that we are great teachers and we're budding teacher researchers, but we're not research scientists. And we needed Tabitha's research scientist brain to help us in getting this first white paper out the door. So Tabitha, could you stand? Okay, now we're going to switch gears and go to our discussants. And Chris, if it's okay, could I start with you? CCSSO is doing a great deal of wonderful work around some of these exact same themes, particularly through SKI and through the InTask committee with the InTask learning progressions, getting a head start on what a continuum might look like. Why? Why is CCSSO so invested in this work?
Thanks, Catherine. Before I answer that, I just wanted to, it's really hard to follow these three, right? So it's impressive the type of teachers we have in this country. And for those of us who live and work in D.C., this is a unique situation for us. I've been on a lot of these type of panels, and we usually talk to each other. I know most of you. So you probably know what I'm going to say. But the comments that were just made by these three really need to be taken seriously. And we in D.C. and actually our members, the state chiefs, need to think about what we're doing to get in the way of this type of activity taking place. So rather than thinking we need new policy, we need to think about what we need to take away. And the idea that somebody couldn't come to this event because they were required to be doing whatever they're doing in their school today, those types of situations you just hear all across the country. And so there's something about our policy set that is causing us to regress to the most protectionist state, I guess I would say. And so for me, we have to create a culture of trust. And so I think the investigation of our current policy set around that is really an interesting conversation. I'm a firm believer in the evaluation push that's going on in the country right now. I think it's good for the teaching profession. I think it will help us prove that most teachers are doing great work across the country. At the same time, it also creates a situation of where we have to continue to talk about trust, because if we don't do it in a way that respects what's going on in the classroom and doesn't put arbitrary numbers on things that don't actually connect to what's going on in the classroom, I think we're going to end up looking back as a missed opportunity for us as a country. So that's just sort of the context for this conversation. And Catherine asked me to talk briefly about the InTask standards and some of the work we're doing on the continuum. State chiefs care about this work mainly because we know we can't hit these higher standards without a change in the profession. We have, along with the National Governors Association, led the process of the Common Core standards, which we did not think would be as exciting as they've become. Mike can probably talk about that better than I can. But the standards have become hotly debated, mostly because we are raising the expectations across the country. And in order to meet those expectations, I think we're going to need a different lens for what the profession looks like. So there's a couple things that came up in the conversation that I just wanted to touch on. I think creating a profession that's respected means a couple things. It means we have to take on the issue of incoming pay, right? And so I know that's something that wasn't mentioned in the report, I think probably purposely, but I do think that if we want incoming teachers coming out of college to want to come into this profession, we have to invest on the front end of this conversation. I think the second piece is also creating opportunities to stay in the classroom and advance. That was touched on earlier. I think our best teachers should be in the classroom. They shouldn't be in other roles. I love the fact that you guys are in other roles, but I'd rather have you teaching kids. And so from a policy side, we have to find ways to keep our best teachers in the classroom. And the last thing I just want to talk about is preparation, because I think I've talked to lots of teachers who just were not prepared on day one. I don't know if you read the New York Times over the weekend. There was an interview with 3 teachers who talked about going into the classroom and spending their first couple years figuring out how to teach. And I think there's lots of good preparation programs across the country. However, I think we can do better. And we're looking forward to working with across the continuum with higher education and with others to really create a situation where people want to go into teaching because it's a great profession, not because they're a martyr. And I think that's the challenge of changing this profession to one that is completely respected is going to mean we have to be more selective on the front end. We have to make sure certification is a real bar for the profession. And so we're working with 7 states to pilot around those types of topics. We released a report back in December, and we're very interested in changing state policies to create a situation that the profession would be more respected and the initial entry into the profession would be a smoother transition for teachers. So those are the things we're interested in. And Catherine, I'll stop so that we can have some more time for questions. So thanks.
Chris, thank you so much. Joanne, can I go to you next? I spoke briefly about Joanne's commitment to teacher leadership and her nurturing of teacher leaders throughout her career. Joanne, why did you make this a focal point of your attention? You could have focused on so many different things. Why teacher leadership? Why empowering teachers? Why teacher voice?
I think you can hear from the conversations that we've just had and the presentations that the 3 teachers made that the solutions to these big problems that we're facing in education are in classrooms. We know the answers. That's what's so hard. When you started your remarks, Catherine, by saying there's nothing new in this paper, that's frustrating because we do know what to do. We need to figure out how to empower people to do it or how to get why people feel disempowered and what it is we're doing that's not permitting people like these 3 but thousands of other teachers out there to take the lead. Because there is nothing, they said, that's dependent on public policy, that's dependent on funding, except for Chris's point that I totally agree with, that the pay structure's not right here. But all of these things should be doable, but we've created a system that's disempowering or sclerotic or in some way is preventing teachers from feeling empowered to step up and do what they, as a community, because doing it individually in your room, you've always been able to do. But doing it as a community for all of the kids that you're responsible for in a school is somehow not sort of penetrating. And it's got to come from schools and classrooms to make these changes. So I just think that the sort of crux of the problem that we need to really figure out is we know what to do. How do we actually make it happen? Are there barriers we need to remove? Are there enablers that we need to put in place? And I would love to, when we get to the conversation part of this, just hear more from folks about what it is that is working in some of the situations you guys are in that's not working in some of your colleagues' situations. Having Chris Paulus be able to see it at the state level is also very interesting because I think there's sort of school district, state, and federal pieces to this, and understanding and unpacking that so we know what to address in which setting is also sort of an interesting part of this. But there's no reason that we shouldn't be able to do this and to implement all the things that you've laid out here, and we need to figure out how to make that happen with real urgency. I'm going to stop there because I think the discussion is going to be the most important and interesting part of this conversation, and hand it over back to you, Catherine.
Thank you so much, Joanne. Mike, as somebody who thinks deeply about policy, you're steeped in policy, you live policy every single day. When you listen to these teachers and when you read the ideas presented in the report, what kinds of policy implications do you see? What kinds of things could policy help us to get done faster? How could policy help us move?
Yeah, no, thanks, Catherine. Well, first of all, as others have said, I mean, how motivating were these talks, right? I mean, this is so fresh and different, as Chris said, because we are used to hearing the same old blah, blah, blah about policy, right? And here we have some amazing teachers talking about teaching and learning and their practice and leadership and collaboration. It's just really exciting. And you know, it's easy today. We have an education policy debate that has gotten quite bitter and angry on both sides, right? And so you can get this sense that, oh my God, you know, we're all going to hell in a handbasket and nothing works and, you know, everything's burning down. And particularly if you spend much time reading Twitter, right? I had a very strange debate with a cucumber last night, and a long story, but the result is that you end up feeling that there's some cucumber on Twitter. I don't know. There's pseudonyms out there. If you're not on Twitter, you don't get it. But you don't have to engage with the cucumber? I actually thought it was a pepper. That was part of the problem. And anyways, I won't make that mistake again. But it is very easy to get pessimistic and to get depressed. But this is very motivating to hear. And what's most exciting is that the conversation is about teaching and learning. And I do think that is something new, that thanks to Common Core is part of that is saying, okay, we're going to come in with this very ambitious set of standards, that the conversation has shifted into how do we teach those standards at a high level. And even the teacher evaluation thing, which many of you here know that I've been skeptical about, because I've been worried about anything that feels like a state-mandated teacher evaluation system that's very prescriptive, because I worry about it feeling to teachers like they are yet again being disempowered. But, you know, hearing from examples of saying, no, there are places where maybe they have gotten the mix right. There's a state framework, but the local district is getting to flesh it out, and teacher leaders are involved in not only fleshing out the framework, but actually doing the work of going in and evaluating teachers, giving feedback, again, to have conversations, professional conversations about teaching and learning. So all of that is just very exciting and motivating. When it comes to policy, though, I'm stumped. I mean, I think you heard this a little bit from Chris and from Joanne, right? This is a typical dilemma for those of us that think about policy. We see pockets of really good practice happening, and we don't know how can we make those pockets become the norm, right? So, you know, because we often hear about these things not going well. We hear about people feeling like Common Core's just being, you know, pushed down on their throat, or they've had no say in the curriculum that the district is adopting, or, you know, so again, it's disempowering, or the teacher evaluation thing feels like it's being done to them instead of with them. And so, you know, I hear this and I think, boy, you know, I would think if I were a superintendent that I would like to think that I would hear these stories and I'd say, wow, we should do this too. And we should find new roles for teacher leaders and we should get them engaged in all this important work. So there's no policy answer. We just need those superintendents to just do it, right? And yet on this issue and many others, it doesn't seem to work, right, for whatever reason. So I guess I am mostly left with more questions than answers, Catherine, which is to say, for some of these very common sense ideas, like allowing teachers to have these teacher leader roles, or to make sure there is time in the schedule for collaboration, common sense, nuts and bolts, not brand new ideas, what is getting in the way? Is there a role for policy, as Chris and Joanne said? Are there things we need to take away? Are there incentives we need to put in place? Do we need to just have a real campaign to get the word out? Maybe superintendents are not the people we need to convince. Maybe we need to get the word out to other teachers who would like to play these roles and say, look, hear what Megan gets to spend her day doing. Would you like to do that in your school district? Here's a toolkit for how to advocate for that sort of thing where you are and the evidence behind it. Again, I'm not sure what it is. I'm not sure that policy has an answer on this one. But we surely need to do, keep thinking through this. One last point would be, I would be curious to study this in the charter school sector or in the private school sector. And to say, you know, is it happening in those places where you would imagine there are not the same kinds of policy barriers? If it is, let's learn from that. I mean, do high-end independent schools allow for these kinds of roles? That would be interesting to know. John Chubb, who now runs the Independent Schools Association, I bet would be interested in that kind of research. Likewise in charter schools. If it's not happening, why not? Again, it may not be the policy barriers. It may be that people haven't thought to do it before. Or the leaders haven't been exposed to these common sense ideas. So let's take it to the next step by further understanding, why we're not seeing these great ideas spread everywhere.
Thank you, Mike. Please join me in thanking all three of our discussants. Thank you for those very thought-provoking and thoughtful responses. We'd now like to open it up to you. Emily, that hand went up right away, so I'm going to bring you the mic. And I'm going to adhere to the Rick Hess rule. Ask a question.
Which one? We're all very nervous.
Ask a question. If after 15 seconds we don't hear a question, we're going to move on. I know Emily will ask a question.
Emily Feistritzer. I'm the founder of a new online teacher development program called Teach Now. My question is, how do you see the online world playing a role both in building teacher leaders and particularly in getting collaboration among teachers across the world, and also in impacting policy change merely by virtue of the fact that it would get much more visibility?
So Emily, I love this question, basically because what you're asking is a huge part of how I've learned as a professional educator with colleagues, but beyond just those in my school. As you were talking about, Josh, that's really important collaboration, but sometimes it's really great and powerful to collaborate with colleagues who are dealing with similar problems and issues in states that are far away from yours, in school buildings across your district, in other countries. And that collective brain power can be really powerful. I think sometimes teaching can be very isolating. It's easy to get siloed, and it's a way to break through that isolation. And I work with all kinds of colleagues on the collaboratory with CTQ on issues of policy, curriculum, a lot of stuff around the Common Core right now. And it's just having a great big network to help troubleshoot, problem solve, create solutions that are great for our students.
I would add on the online side, just from a policy perspective, Mike can have a debate with a cucumber online. I do think you have this situation where a lot of the public dialogue is taking place online. I mean, I get somebody sends me a feed every day of all the Common Core conversation online, and it's 95% crazy, but there is a certain drumbeat that's going on that's a problem for us. And so if we don't have the same drumbeat around these types of changes, that we're providing teachers opportunities to grow, that we're providing teachers for salary increases that aren't just step increases because they got a master's degree, that we're providing situations where if the teacher proves themselves, we don't wait 3 years to give them another opportunity, that we do it now. I mean, I don't run CCSSO like that, right? I mean, if somebody in our organization is showing they can do what they need to do, we don't wait 3 years to advance them. So we have to do the same thing in education, and this has to be a local conversation. This is not a national policy fix. We've got to have this conversation locally. So the online world can be a big contributor to starting to change that conversation, I think. So.
I'll just add to how the online world enables me as a practitioner to fulfill some of these leadership roles. And one of the ways that I could be absent from my school but still ensure continuity of instruction with my students is through, we use social networking sites that allow collaboration and instruction to occur in the virtual world between me and my students when I'm not there. And so that's something that enables teachers to be able to go out and fulfill a role that doesn't require them to be in the school at all times.
So I think that this question is a very central question for the future, because I think we're at a real inflection point right now that's brought on by the fact that the Common Core standards are going to make it so that teachers across the country are teaching the same thing. So the idea of having professional learning communities that go outside the boundaries of your school or district is completely will make sense. And the Common Core is going to require teachers to teach in whole new ways if they really want to get to the standards, the way the standards are going to hopefully be measured. So everybody is going to be engaged in a big learning activity for the next 5 years to rethink what teaching looks like, what role technology is going to play in teaching as well as in learning for students, and what that's going to mean for me as a teacher. So the whole profession over the next, call it 5 years, because of the pervasiveness of technology and because of the Common Core standards, is going to be undergoing a huge, huge change. And I think technology will be the enabler on both the teaching and the learning sides of this. And I think that it will just be coming into classrooms, at least through all of the young teachers coming in to schools, in a way that could create a digital divide within teachers, in schools, and stuff that we're going to have to think through. So I think there's going to be a whole new spate of issues we're going to have to address. But I think technology is going to really be an important enabler to help us sort of get across this period of the next 5 years and figure out what teaching and learning are going to look like in the future in a really exciting way. Like, it's going to be a sort of hard but fun time to be in teaching for the next few years, I think, because of this.
Thank you. Hand in the back on the left-hand side. I apologize, I don't know your name. Stand up. I'm going to bring you the mic. Okay.
Districts want to offer these opportunities for their teachers, but they also need to maintain control and a consistent message. So what baby steps can districts take to encourage their teachers to take on these professional roles?
That's a huge question, and I think it looks different in every district. I think a common theme, too, we've talked about is trust in the profession, and I think it all boils down to trust and working through some of these tough issues through conversations. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer for that. I know even having a very supportive district who not only appreciates the role and sees the value in it, but also worked on their side to help support me. There were a lot of difficult conversations and tough questions and uncomfortable moments when we're talking about, okay, so you're in your classroom from 7:30 to 11:30. Then where are you going to work? You're not going to work in a school building? And like, that was one issue they really had a hard time with. Even my teachers association that I absolutely love, but it's so new in the way we're thinking. It's hard to kind of wrap your head around these different roles and the fact that, you know, I might be working from the Hillsborough Education Foundation in the afternoon and then sitting in my living room working on my virtual community or with my virtual community on a virtual PLC. So I don't know if that helped answer your question, but.
Yeah, I think that the way, the small steps that I would take would be first, you want to identify the talent, the people that are capable of fulfilling these roles. And then you want to look to what's already in place in a school. At my school, we have instructional leaders, we have coaches, we have data teams. So look at those positions that already exist and think about how you can move them or transform them into the roles that we hope for and we envision. And thirdly, you want to do fewer things very well from the onset, because if you can show you're doing something well, then that's going to create a momentum to do more things well. And just echoing on Josh's comments about collaboration, the process has to be collaborative. You have to involve not just teachers and administrators, but the local unions, and you have to make sure that everybody's on board with what you're trying to move. And I think the biggest selling point that you can make when you're trying to push through any kind of new initiative or transform some aspect of teaching is to try to look through the lens of how is this positively affecting students and student achievement. And I think that that's where you're going to find consensus from groups of stakeholders when you're bringing forward these ideas.
I would suggest also a couple of other baby steps. One baby step being examine your scheduling structure. Are you still using a schedule that's based on the bus schedule? If you are, there's probably improvements that you could make to free people up, to create those collaborative communities, and to give people time in which to serve as teacher leaders, getting into each other's classrooms, modeling lessons, peer observing. These are all teacher leader roles and activities that schedule right now inhibits us from doing in many places. So look at your schedule. I would also encourage us as a community to seriously take steps to purge this drain that we're experiencing. The cost of teacher turnover is excessively high, as Megan noted. When we have to onboard new teachers and do that every single year, because every single year teachers are leaving, that's a tremendous financial cost, and it's a tremendous cost in terms of student learning. So finding ways to retain our teachers, and many of those ways that we would certainly suggest would be through teacher leadership roles and activities, would also be not so much a baby step, I suppose, a giant step, but it would be a step. We do have a question from an online participant, Nadine Davidson in Iowa. Excuse me, Nadine, forgive me, Iowa. And the question is, how is higher education engaged in this conversation? Would anyone like to tackle that in the audience or on the panel?
So our friends from higher education are here, Jim and others. Yeah. So I'll do my best. Okay. So you guys can tell me how you feel about this. But we are throughout the pilot that I spoke about, working in 7 states to try to engage a conversation about higher education and really thinking about preparation differently, thinking about more time in the classroom for teachers, thinking about different structures as they're being prepared so that teachers are really feeling like they have those first 3 years, which tend to be the most challenging years, are happening when they have a lot of guidance. So they could happen when they were still in school, or possibly with a district collaboration in the first couple years of their time in school. So I think I'm actually really optimistic about this. I think we are moving in the right direction, and I am seeing a partnership from higher education that is really promising. So on that front, I think we're going in the right direction. I think another piece of the higher education is not just the preparation, but higher education accepting, as we're trying to change the student learning experience, moving away from just grading systems towards standards-based type of conversations. We have to have a conversation with higher education about how we're accepting students into higher education. That's sort of a separate conversation from today, but both of those are important pieces. And it sounds like Jane wants to add something. Would you like to add anything?
I'm coming, Jane.
American Association of Colleges for Teacher Education, and I'm on Relaxed Friday, unlike you all. Thanks to you all for your really, really great thoughts. It just, I think as everybody said, we tend to talk to each other in Washington. I was a teacher many, many years ago, so I'm far away from the classroom now, but just to hear what you have to say is so invigorating. I feel my 15-second cutoff coming. I think, higher education is shifting and reforming itself just like every other sector is. There are many of our programs that are now offering programs in teacher leadership. That's new. They're under development. Maybe you're familiar with some of them. We have a partnership with the Center on Teaching Quality, where I know you've been working. One of our members in Virginia just had this 3-day conference in conjunction with the Center on Teaching Quality about how to reinvent themselves to produce teacherpreneurs. How do we prepare people to go in and take on a different role? It's going to be a major theme at our annual meeting next March, where we will be featuring some teachers in these roles. So it's under development, like so many parts of our sector. It's under development, and we want to follow your lead. We want to follow the lead of those of you all who are inventing this, so that we can prepare people to do what you're doing. Thank you.
I would just add on the last thing on the higher education side is the states are really excited about the new accreditation standards, the CAPE standards. I think you're seeing states take those on and really consider them as part of their program approval process. So I think you're going to see some changes in how we're looking at these programs, that it's not just based in theory, but it's actually based in the graduates they're producing. So we're excited about those changes.
I would just add one additional thought. Many of our state teachers of the year and other exemplary teachers are teaching teachers at the higher education level, either as adjunct faculty or visiting faculty, as Megan is doing this year. And I think that that's another great way to bring the classroom into higher education. We have a question here, we have a question there, we have a question from online, and then the two ladies. So let's go in that order.
I'm Peter Greer. I've been a dean and a superintendent and a headmaster a while back, a few years back. But my question is, aren't there the same impediments? Isn't the reason why you're saying things that aren't new but are so important and significant? Because the impediments are the same. For example, getting the best people to go into the universities, into the schools of ed. When I was at Boston University, John Silber said, Greer, you can't accept any students unless they have 1,200 boards when it was 16. I'll give 10 full scholarships on merit, and you can have a mansion on the Charles we'll call Education House to show it's important. How many other colleges and universities do that? What you do hear about the caliber of students, as well-meaning and aspirational as they are, we're not getting the best people to go into teaching. Isn't that the same impediment now? How about who evaluates? I remember I brought in the British inspectorate in one of my schools. They have to be trained for 5 years to evaluate. And when they came into the school as an alternative to what I think is mind-numbing accreditation associations, then isn't that an impediment? The regional accreditation groups and who evaluates. I was thinking of another role for teachers, that they could become trained, and that could be a role they go into rather than being an assistant principal. Unions depended, in my experience, on who the president was, but the language of the contract was a killer on any new ideas, whether they had to do with collaboration. So isn't that the usual impediment? And I'll stop there. I've talked long enough. So my question is, usual impediments, or is it great progress?
So I feel like we've got a lot of partnerships and a lot of momentum and a lot of conversations around solutions for those impediments. So on one hand, I'm kind of a Pollyanna and an eternal optimistically hopeful person. But on the other hand, I feel like there's so much conversation and movement. I feel like we're working towards solutions around those impediments, how to get over, around, through, under, whatever it takes.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the challenges you listed. I think I do think it's a different conversation this time. I mean, I've only, I don't have as much experience as you do probably, but I do think that I'm hearing from state chiefs that they are willing to take on these impediments, at least, and I'm hearing from other parts of the system that they're willing to take on these impediments. I think what the administration, and largely to Joanne's credit, what they've done with Race to the Top is a great model, actually, and possibly thinking about that in state-based situations. So giving people the opportunity to do the right thing and then giving them money to do it is something that I think we should be thinking about. When it's their choice to do it, it's got much more sticking power than if somebody tells them to do it.
So I actually think that relationship building and collaboration is one of the approaches you can take to get through the impediments. And I want to share an experience I had over the last 2 years, and I know Joanne has had this experience as well, was being a fellow at the Aspen Institute in the Teacher Leader Fellowship. And what that program did was convene teachers, classroom teachers, union heads of very large unions, state school chiefs, charter school teachers and charter school leaders, and people from teacher voice organizations around a common table, leaders from these different groups, to have solution-oriented discussions. Those Aspen Fellowships culminate with action-oriented projects to try to arrive at, what do we need to do, and then to have these people go back and talk to their respective groups. And I think tapping leadership from these different groups and having them in a solution-oriented environment is a way to begin those conversations to overcome some of the impediments that we face.
Hi, John Wright with the National Education Association, and 20 years as a classroom teacher and teacher leader, union leader. I'd like to hear you all talk a little more about how policy intersects with structure. I think Megan spoke to it briefly when she was talking about how her day was very different, and that involved a different structure to her time. And Catherine mentioned it when she said, if your collaboration time is bounded by your bell schedule or your bus schedule, then there's difficulty. Well, our bus schedules are often bounded by a 19th century agrarian structure. So if we're still working with, our kids are with us from September to June from 7:30 to 3:30, and that's the time we're considered at work. If we're a teacher, there's some structural impediments, it would seem to me. So in terms of time as a structure and staffing as a structure and how that intersects with policy, what are some other ideas for something a little more radical within those current constraints? Thanks.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, and then you guys, if you want to talk about how that's going for you. I mean, I guess what I'm hearing is from you, and I hope you're speaking on behalf of the NEA, that you would want to consider a more open structure of what a day looks like, and I think that's an important conversation to have, and I think it's going to take both the union and the administration to coming to the table and having that conversation, because I think it will be a compensation conversation, but we all know teachers don't just work from 7:30 to 4 anyway, no matter what we tell them to do. I mean, they're at home grading. I was at a football tailgate last weekend, and I had a teacher there grading papers at the tailgate. And I thought, well, I wonder if she's getting paid for that. I do think that we have to have a new conversation about this, and it has to be one of mutual trust. It can't be, well, if you ask us to come in 15 minutes early, then we've got to renegotiate the contract every time. But it's also, we also have to acknowledge that this is a real conversation, and it can't just be about money and time. It has to be about structure. And so that means contracts have to look different. It means we have to support teachers in this conversation. There are places where this is working. I mean, I think Hillsborough is one of the places everybody points to, but I think we have good examples. We just have to keep pushing on it, and we have to keep saying what you just said, which is we have these old school mentalities around this, and we're going to have to get out of those if we're going to be successful. So,
Joanne?
Thanks. So I think we spend too much time trying to codify in contracts things that are very flexible and fluid and need to not be in contracts but actually be devolved to the people at the school level who are serving a student population that they know well. And the answers for how to manage staffing, time, these other issues in one setting are going to be very different from the needs in another setting. And so trying to codify them at either a district or state level feels wrong to me in this current environment, as opposed to letting the autonomy at the school level really kick in and figure out what their students need and how they need it, and think about these contracts. Again, it gets back to professionalizing teaching. Instead of worrying about minutes and hours and clocking in and clocking out, worrying instead about how much a professional is paid to do the job, and then letting all the people who do that job figure out how to organize themselves and their time.
You know, I mentioned charter schools earlier. Oh, sorry, did I? Oh, Megan's snapping. Oh, you got a snap? I want the Z. I want the Z later. I'm going to go for the Z, Megan. Here we go. So I think these are great questions, and there are solutions out there, right? There must be solutions to figuring out how to do this. One place to look, I've said it before, I'll say it again, is charter schools. That this might be one area where charters are doing things differently, and I think maybe we should go all get together and take a field trip, go see the Achievement First Network or Uncommon Schools or some of the KIPP schools, and try to understand how are they allowing for this. Many of those networks that are growing fast have a big leadership challenge, which is their pipeline is they get in young teachers, they're in the classroom for a few years, and then they want to get them on the trajectory where they can open up their own charter school. And so they have to think about what kind of leadership roles to give those people to get them ready, how to do that in a very smart way. And there may be some lessons that can translate to the traditional public schools.
So I think one of the solutions to the structure dilemma is to identify what's working, okay? And look at like successful examples like Megan explained or Josh or some of the roles that I described where they're working. And then work backwards from what is working. And so when we say what's working, what's leading to student achievement? Because ultimately people have a cry for, we want increased levels of student achievement. So if it's these roles or it's these positions that are producing student achievement, we work backwards and say, so what kind of a schedule do we need or what kind of an infrastructure do we need to support this? And I think that, so you start to talk about that and you say, how? How are we going to do this now? And to start with things that are working first and moving backwards, I think that you can start to address some of the antiquated systems and come to ideas about how you might adjust or change or reinvent them so that we can replicate what we know that's working in schools with teacher leadership.
Let's see that again. To piggyback on the idea of learning from what's working, I think of other countries that have models aside from our archaic kind of structure of time and place with our public schools. I think of like Finland, for example. Their teachers for a year are in front of students 600 hours. In the US, we're about 1,000 hours. So in Finland, they're giving teachers time to collaborate, lesson plan, research, work on like degrees and things that are going to help impact their students, and builds more of a professional culture. So just rethinking ways of time and space in other countries and seeing what's working in other places through maybe some virtual collaboration with these networks, and seeing how that can be replicated here. And learning from non-examples too. I know last year being an elementary school teacher where we have this idea where it's one teacher, 25 students, which is kind of an archaic model too, I think, but that might be my opinion. That brought about some problems in my year last year. And so also, is that truly collaborative? Like what if we have multiple teachers working with large groups of students? So just thinking about the way we're structuring our schools, I think there are models out there we can definitely learn from.
One place that you might want to look for some of those models is Public Impact's site on opportunity culture, where they have done a lot of work on differentiated staffing. I'm going to go to an online question, then I'm going here and here, okay? I promised. Francesca Ernst, the panel has talked about involving community stakeholders. How do we engage parents? Josh?
All right, so I've been just kind of soaking in all this conversation, such great conversation. I did want to, before answering Francesca's question, to address your question that I had some time to think about, because I was thinking, is it the same old impediments? And I think yes, but I think they've been strengthened. And I think they've been made stronger, unfortunately, by a convergence of things. You have globalization, which was not the case 30, 40, 50 years ago to the degree that it is now. You have technology that has flattened it and has opened up the playing field to so many different competing elements in students. You have poverty, which has been on the rise, especially child poverty. Then you have high-stakes testing. You put all of that together, and it makes collaboration much harder to do because we're thinking about teaching to the test. It makes all these things much more powerful because of all the other competing things that, so the context has become more pressurized, which makes the impediments bigger. But I do think in the positive thing that you talked about, which is now people want to do it more because the urgency is there now. We got to tackle these now. Whereas before, maybe in the industrial kind of way that we were doing things where jobs were available that were automated tasks, that's not anywhere anymore. So I think that's with that. Engaging parents, one of the things that I do in my job now, working for the Office of Title I, is that I actually engage parents. Look, a couple of things parents want to know. Do you welcome my kid into class? Does my kid get better in your class? And would you want to see him again, right? So I think that has to be communicated in some sort of way to the community. And I think one of the ways you do it is with transparency. How often do schools share what their school progress plans are with the entire community and hold themselves accountable and hold it for public conversation? How can we make our school better and make them active participants in the creation of these progress plans? That's the first thing. I think secondly, the information pipeline to parents has got to be better and more consistent, because the parent wants to know, hey, it's been 4 weeks and Johnny had a B 4 weeks ago, now suddenly he has a D. What's going on? How can I help my kid? I was in a meeting about 2 months ago, and a parent called the office very irate. And she was talking, of course, about the transfer option and that being eliminated in some of the schools that we have in Title I. She was very, very upset about it. So naturally, I was passed the phone. I was like, oh, thanks. So so I handled this conversation, but what was beating at the heart of her problem wasn't so much the transfer option, although that was one. Was the fact that she didn't know how she could help her kid get better, and she wasn't getting information for that. So I think we need to engage parents with what can you do at home with your kid that can make them better. So when we had the meeting with the principal and I introduced some concepts that they can do at home, they felt so much more empowered to do well for their kids. And we think that all parents have had the same history with schools, and they haven't. Not all parents have had this wonderful upbringing with school. Maybe they have a resistance to it. And let's not even go into some of our limited English proficient speakers who may have that barrier there. How many schools have translators on hand for those populations? So I think we need to look at how we service parents, what information we give to parents, and how we communicate love for their children to them, right? So I think that's the parent engagement piece. But the last piece is, and I've been talking to a lot of, in Baltimore County, we have parent service coordinators. So at every single Title I school, we have dedicated people who actually serve the parents' interests. So I've been talking to the parent service coordinators, and I said, listen, you're thinking about going out and getting parents, but guess what? The parents are already here. At drop-off, at pickup, there's cars lined all around schools waiting to pick up the kids. What are you providing for them when they're just sitting there? So I think that in schools, we have to be more creative with how we reach the parents, because they're already in the building. But if I'm a parent and I'm coming to your building and I'm sitting all the time waiting for my kid, no one's ever approaching me, no one's giving me information about how to make my kid better, how is it that I can be engaged beyond a bake sale? So I think we really have to think more creative, because a vast untapped reservoir of talent rests in our parents. Who is a bigger advocate for their kid than their parent? And I think that we got to tap into that a little better.
Well said.
Thank you, Josh. I'm going to hand the mic to this lady.
Thank you for giving me a segue. Nancy Gurrell, a New Jersey State Teacher of the Year, 1992. I was a creative writing teacher for 40 years, taught for 40 years. I tried to be a hybrid in a day when they wouldn't allow hybrids. But I became a writer while I was teaching. The segue you just gave me was the word creativity. I hadn't heard it. I sat here for about an hour or so, and I hadn't heard creativity from the panel. Teaching is an art, not a science. Everyone knows it. And for the last 40 years, in all deference to you, I totally agree. We all know what the impediments have been. They are insurmountable. Everything that you said I thought was phenomenal. How are we going to get the best and the brightest? You're absolutely right. We've got to pay them more. If you can figure out how to do that, God bless you. My question is, how are we going to maintain passion in the teaching profession so that all these new young people will stay there and love our kids and teach our kids? All deference to the charter schools. A month ago in the New York Times, and you just said it, they stay and they teach there phenomenally for a couple of years, and then they move on. I don't want them to move on. I want them to stay in the schools, and I want them to be there for the rest of their lives teaching my kids. How are we going to keep them in the schools? And on the subject of collaboration, the other aspect that I also want you to address is, the other word I didn't hear was interdisciplinary education. How are we going to get ourselves to talk to each other? 40 years in the public schools, the math department never talked to the English department. The science department never talked to the art department. The arts and sciences still don't talk to each other. And we're never going to make it to the moon that way.
Okay, or make it back to the moon. All right, so I think there's a lot in what you said. So I may not address everything, and I apologize in advance. And congratulations, that's awesome, 40 years, right? I'm not 40, but that's awesome. All right, so I think sustaining passion is the story of the children. I think we have to keep children at the center of this conversation, which is something else I'm not sure that we've talked about enough, which is the child's voice. I think a lot of times there's a lot of adults talking and the kids aren't in the room and they're not at the center of the story. So I think I'm most invigorated as a teacher. Oh, is someone snapping or something else? All right. I think I'm most invigorated as a teacher and the teachers that I know when I hear about how it's working for a kid, or when I feel like, okay, this is working here. I have stories that help, kind of increase my passion. That's the first thing. Then the collaboration. Because if I'm a teacher, I want my leader to teach me how to do my job better. I want them to be very clear, and I want them to be very serious about the work that we have. Those three things. So I think that if a leader has that, then the collaboration has that spirit to it. I feel invigorated when I can plan a really great lesson. I don't know how people have taught before in this room. Maybe actually, raise your hand if you've taught in a classroom. All right. So what is better than a well-planned lesson executed well? What kind of feeling do you have from that? I mean, you want to do that every day. You don't want to leave because you have kids wrapped in attention. So I think collaboration is a pathway to passion, right? And I think that needs to happen more. So to answer the second part of your question was, how do we get them to talk to each other? Listen, the leaders have to lead this. Teachers have to lead this. Leaders have to lead this. There was someone who came to me. It was a teacher, and I teach an English methods course at Notre Dame, Maryland University on Saturdays, and she said, Mr. Parker, you talk about all this stuff about life-changing literacy and all these things, and they're great, but I can't do it because I'm not sure what my department chair is going to say about it. And I want to talk to but I'm not sure what this one's going to say. I said, listen, practice the things against which there is no law, which is to say, the people that you know that you can have good conversation with, start the conversation now. And this is not the issue. I love the NEA, but the policy and its interplay with structure is important. But the things that we know to do, let's just do them at this teacher level, because at the heart of what is going to improve our practice is our love for kids. And she was talking about, how do you empower teachers? Well, you keep the kids in front. This is what we're doing it for. We're not doing it to be self-aggrandizing or to be in front all the time. We're doing it because the kids need it. And if we do it for the kids, what better incentive is there? So I think that's kind of how you do with the passion and also with the talking to each other. Just do it, like Nike. All right, sorry.
I also, Teach for America, with all of the problems of people only doing this for 2 years and leaving, they found a way to make teaching glamorous to a set of kids. And so we have to figure out what they did and there's a lot of things that you can learn from that. So, while I'm a big fan of the program in terms of helping underserved kids, but I also think that we need to figure out how we keep those people in the classroom. At the same time, there's something there that people want in, and so we should be learning from that.
So for a large part of this conversation, I heard a lot about data, I heard a lot about teacher evaluation, and then I heard some more about student data. And it seems that what's undergirding this is how and what do I do and not why am I doing it, right? So you talked about inspection of what you expect, and I teach a course at George Washington, and I'm asking my teachers to think of why they're doing it and not how or what they did. And so if it's not so much a question as in a statement of you thinking about why are you doing this, because if the answer to the why you're doing it is teacher evaluation and for the purposes of data, then I think we have a bigger problem.
Yeah, I mean, given this is the last question, we could leave that as a statement. I agree completely. I mean, I think the two biggest things we have to do are professionalize the profession, so making it much more about people being respected to do their jobs and giving them the support they need to do their jobs. And the other piece is really dealing with retention. And so unless we do some of these things, we will not deal with the retention problem that Megan pointed out. So those are the two things that I'm thinking about in this space.
So that was actually what I just talked about, the why. That was my whole statement, which is we can talk teacher evaluation, we can talk collaboration, we can talk any other Asian you want to talk about. But the heart of it is the students. That's why we do this. That's the only reason, well, that's the only reason I'm in it. I can't speak for everybody else, but the only reason I'm in it is because I need to know the data of my kids because they need to progress. If they don't progress in literacy, they're not going to understand what life-changing lessons can come from books such as The Invisible Man or A Raisin in the Sun. That's why I do it. That's why we need to have collaboration so that kids can access text in a powerful way. So the kid is at the center of this conversation. That's the reason why we're doing it. Is your question better? Right. Okay, I'm kind of misunderstanding what you're saying. So you're saying what is our own motivation? Okay. Well, I agree with your statement that it's important to ask why, like, and be reflective. I'm not really sure, so I'm sorry. But I appreciate the second to last question. All right, so.
Okay, last question because we're running out of time.
Hi, my name is Mark Zabulski. I'm a consultant in town here. And I want to know this because the conversation moved to the kids just in about the last 20% of it. So I'm wondering, is teacher leadership of teachers the same thing as teacher leadership of kids? If so, why? If not, why not? And if so, can we not evaluate based on those qualities and either keep teachers or move them on to something else based on that?
I've been talking a lot, so I'll be very brief here. I think you're trying to distinguish teacher leaders of teachers and also teacher leadership of kids. Oh, okay. Well, not necessarily. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think they're more symbiotic. I think that teachers lead children in the classroom, but if you lead teachers effectively, they also then impacts the student effectively. So I don't think you can have one without the other. I think they both feed each other. And what we've been talking about up here is how do you improve teacher leadership of teachers so that the teachers can then impact the students better? That's kind of my idea of it. I don't know if anyone wants to add.
Just to say that, there's a great book that came out a couple years ago about teaching as leading. And, this seems to be an important insight to say that, Teach for America, for example, when they study which of their teachers end up having the biggest impacts, it is people who come in with very strong leadership abilities. And so that may give us some clues, again, as we redesign teacher preparation programs, that leadership development has to be a part of that. And we might be able to learn from some other schools and universities who already do a good job of teaching young people how to be strong leaders.
What Josh said. I think you can't have one without the other, and I think of generations of impact. And so when I'm working online with a couple teachers and we're having conversation about questions with our students, I know my first generation impact are the 20 students sitting in my classroom, but I know as a result of that collaboration and that work, there are multiple generations of impact because those teachers are going back and working with their students, sharing with their colleagues, second generation, third generation. So I think you don't have one without the other. It's all about this. I can send you a graphic. No, we've done a lot of deep thinking this year because the first question I got from my school board is, when are we going to see impact on students? When am I going to see when you're leading outside the classroom, when are we going to see something quantifiable in black and white data? And so we've had a lot of conversations about how do we collect qualitative and quantitative data, but make sure that we're keeping the kids at the heart of that conversation. And I've got a graphic.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions. I also just wanted to close with a thought of mine. On September 1st, I realized that I had been in this position at NNSTOY for 1 year, and NNSTOY had been in its new role as a revitalized organization for State Teachers of the Year for 1 year, so it was sort of our birthday. And I also realized that I had been in education for 37 years. And I thought, if I went back into my middle school library, I'm a librarian, if I went back into my middle school library today, how different would it be than when I left it 13 years ago? And the answer is not very. And one of the purposes of writing this paper is because we want the answer to be very, very, not very. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your interest in this topic. And let's continue the conversation over lunch. We're going to do lunch this way. Middle school teacher, can't help myself. Out this door, lunch is right there. Pick up your lunch, circle back in this door, and please talk to each other, talk to the people up here. Let's continue these great conversations. Mike?
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Catherine. First of all, let's all thank Catherine Bassett for bringing us together. What a great job on the report, on the panel, but especially on bringing this organization together, a much-needed voice here for teacher leadership. Just to say that if you found this conversation invigorating, and I think we all did, make sure to tell your friends, colleagues, networks that it is available online almost immediately. It'll be on our website at excellence.net, and I imagine on the NNSTOY website we'll make sure there's a link as well. And so we'd love to get hundreds, thousands of people hearing about what happened here today, the magic of technology. Also, for those of you in D.C. or online, we're going to be having our next panel discussion at Fordham on October 23rd, right? Okay, good. It is called The Curricular Controversies of the Common Core. And we're going to be talking about some of the big controversies in math and English language arts. Jason Zimba, the author of the Math Standards, will be with us, as well as a panel of teachers. So we're very excited about that. So with that said, again, thank our panel, and please enjoy your lunch. Thanks so much.